The 15-year-old girl left her home on her bicycle and disappeared. The next day she was found in a field and the police began to search for the criminal, but they didn't have any leads, and this case has been frozen for years. Investigators never stopped looking for the killer, and it was 49 years later that they finally named him. Julianne Hanson was born in 1957 in a suburb of Chicago called Naperville. This place was famous for a quiet and safe life away from the bustle of the city. She had a big, close-knit family, loving parents, a big sister, and a little brother. The girl was very fond of singing, was a member of the music group of her school and local choir. Every weekend, she also attended Sunday school at the church. On 7 July 1972, at the age of 15, she attended a baseball game in which her younger brother participated. Julie took his bike from home and went to the stadium, which was only a few kilometers away. But there she did not appear, and by the evening did not return home. Her parents at that time were away and were going to come a few days later. Julie and her brother were cared for by her older sister, Jill, who was 18 at the time, but she didn't notice Julie's absence until the next day. Maybe the sister thought the girl was in her room, or she was staying with a friend. In those years, people were much less afraid that something bad might happen to their loved ones, because the number of crimes was much lower than it is now. Naperville was also known for its extremely low crime rate. It was a quiet, friendly community. On July 8, her sister sounded the alarm, as Julie never showed up. She called her friends, but no one had seen her. Then Jill decided to go to the police. They began to search for the girl, and were soon joined by dozens of local volunteers. Together they searched the route Julie was supposed to take to the stadium. A few hours later, the police found her bicycle lying on the side of the road. There were no traces of the girl nearby. The search focused on this area, and soon they were in for a terrible find. They found Julie's body in a field just a few dozen yards from her bike. She was lying about a mile from her home. In those years, the area was not so densely built up by residential buildings, and most of it was occupied by high vegetation cornfields. The medical examiner found that Julie had been stabbed 36 times with a sharp instrument and had been assaulted. They were also able to find traces of the alleged killer's semen on the victim's clothing, but in the 70s, this evidence could not help them. It was not until 2 decades later that DNA analysis was used extensively in forensic science. But forensics still kept the sample and sent it to the lab for safekeeping. There was no evidence of the crime scene, so the detective had to find the killer blind. They immediately decided to conceal from the public the fact that the girl had been abused. Investigators often used this technique as it was possible to identify the perpetrator. Only the killer can know such details, and there's a chance that he'll spill the beans during an interrogation or in private. Detectives were trying to find witnesses, looking into suspicious individuals with criminal histories in the area, but they never managed to get any leads. As a result, they quickly found themselves in a dead end. It wasn't until 20 years later that a serious lead was made. Then the police arrested 42-year-old Major Maurice on charges of murdering another young girl. In 1973, the body of 16-year-old Roberta Anderson was found in Oswego, just 17 kilometers from Naperville. She received 60 blows with a sharp instrument and was subjected to violence. And on her body was found a biological sample of the criminal. Maurice was originally a suspect, but without DNA evidence, it was simply impossible to prove his guilt. At that time, he lived near the victim and worked as a garbage collector. 2 days after the murder, the young man left in a hurry. That only reinforced the suspicion about him. After that, he married. He had 2 daughters. The family lived a normal and unremarkable life. In 1992, detectives reopened the case and obtained a sample of Maurice's DNA, which matched the sample found on Roberta's body. When the family learned of this, they were shocked to learn that Maurice was a loving and kind man. They were even more shocked after he confessed to killing Roberta. As a result, Maurice received 100 to 200 years in prison. He was also accused of murdering an 18-year-old girl in 1978, which happened in the town of Glen Ellyn. After a lengthy investigation, Maurice also confessed to the crime. All of these locations were in suburban Chicago, like Naperville. In fact, the details of the murders were very much the same as Julie's. Multiple blows with a sharp object, violence. Even the bodies were found at roughly the same distance from the victims' homes. Of course, the police couldn't have missed such a string of matches. Julie's investigators were convinced that Maurice was behind her murder, so they immediately requested a DNA test. The wait took a little more than a month, during which the man denied involvement. To the detectives' surprise, Maurice's sample did not really match the material found on Julie's clothes. They had no doubt that they would end this 20-year investigation, but he was not involved. At one point, Gary Lucas's serial killer confessed to killing Julie Hansen, but investigators didn't really believe him. The fact is that after his arrest, Lucas confessed to the murder of more than 100 people, of whom 11 were proved. The man often claimed responsibility for other people's crimes, but after a brief conversation with detectives, it became clear that he had nothing to do with these cases. Since then, the case has once again gone into a draw. Police continued to work on it. According to the detectives, they had new leads and suspects, but they were all stumped. At one point, a man named Bruce Lindell came to the attention of the police. A serial killer and rapist who operated in the 70s and 80s, suburban Chicago. He was charged with 12 murders, but only 2 were proven. His handwriting also matched Julie's murder. The perpetrator inflicted multiple blows with a sharp instrument, after which he subjected the victims to violence. Lindell himself died in 1981. He attacked an 18-year-old boy, but he resisted. While the perpetrator stabbed him, he accidentally injured himself and died on the spot. In 2020, his DNA sample was compared to a sample from the Julie case. However, it didn't match. Another year passed. In June 2021, the Naperville Police Department held a press conference at which detectives made a powerful statement. 49 years later, they found Julie Hansen's killer. They found Barry Lee Welpley, aged 76. The man was arrested and charged with murder. At the press conference, the detectives told how they managed to find this man. It turned out that in 1972, when he was 27 years old, Barry lived just a mile from Julie's house. In 49 years of investigation, he never became a suspect. Police didn't even know he existed. Barry worked as a welder all his life, was married 3 times and had 2 daughters. At the time of his arrest, he and his wife lived in another state. Detectives could never get to him, but modern technology allows them to solve cases in a different way. They decided to send a DNA sample of Julie's killer to a special lab that deals with genetic genealogy. This was the last chance to learn the truth. They had to hand over the entire sample, which weighed 1 trillion grams. Despite being stored in a laboratory, this tiny piece of evidence deteriorated over time and lost its properties, which only made the work of the experts more difficult. On the basis of the DNA sample, they searched for possible relatives of the owner, after which investigators were involved. Most often, the lab gives them lists of thousands of people who may be related to a criminal. Police have to sift out unsuitable options for months and track those they see as promising. When searching for relatives based on the DNA sample, not only use the FBI registry with previously convicted people, but also several public databases. Anyone who wants can upload their DNA to them to find lost relatives. Someone from Barry's family did this. As a result, the detectives finally identified him. He is currently in custody, awaiting trial. Bail is set at $10 million, given that his DNA was on the victim's clothing. Barry has virtually no chance of getting away with it. However, some problems have arisen in the course of the investigation that delay the trial. According to Barry's lawyers, the police violated the law during the search of his house. First, they did not read him his rights, but the suspect was questioned. Secondly, when Barry's wife came home, the police recorded her and her husband's dialogue on their breastplates, which was also a violation. Because of this, the judge had to remove these notes from the case file, but they would still not have played a special role. The only problem is, these moments are a huge drag on the court, and Barry may not be old enough to live to be sentenced. Unfortunately, Julie's parents never found out who was responsible for her death. The girl's father died in 2009 and her mother in 2019. Her brother and sister, on the other hand, attended a press conference and thanked the investigators for their work. They had long since given up hope that the truth would ever come out. As for Barry, his relatives were shocked in such news. They had no idea that a loving family man could keep such a terrible secret for 49 years. He also has a completely clean criminal history, but investigators fear that the man may have killed someone else. They're currently reviewing other crimes committed in that area and are trying to find similarities. In this way, modern technology makes it possible to identify the perpetrator, even in cases where no clue has been found in half a century. On the other hand, the killer lived to 76 years in freedom. He was respected by his friends and loved by his family. Even if he is sentenced to life imprisonment, he will not spend much time there. Share your opinion on this story in the comments, and don't forget to like it if you like it. I also recommend you to subscribe to this channel. It motivates to make more interesting videos. Thank you for watching.